DD India Global, we'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. My colleague Kate Fisher joins me from Washington, D.C. Kate, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. and 3 o'clock in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, Donald Trump has been removed from the presidential primary ballot in Colorado by the state's highest court after it determined that he engaged in insurrection on the 6th of January 2021. And we're in Ukraine, where President Zelensky says that he needs 500,000 more people to join the country's military. Now, though, back to Tanvi with the headlines in New Delhi.
Israel continues to battle Hamas as the UNSC delays vote on Gaza aid by another day. US says it's working with countries on the UN draft resolution. Donald Trump campaigns in Iowa after Colorado's top court disqualifies him from the 2024 presidential primary election race, calls the verdict undemocratic.
They are willing to violate the U.S. Constitution at levels never seen before in order to win this election. Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. It's a threat. They're weaponizing law enforcement for high-level election interference because we're beating them so badly in the polls.
The European Union strikes a new deal on hosting and limiting migrants and asylum seekers more evenly. And India reviews its public health preparedness as total active COVID cases reach 2,300 with 21 cases of the JN1 variant. WHO classifies JN1 variant as a variant of interest, but the one that poses low risk. Now, first news from West Asia. Israeli President Isaac Herzog said on Tuesday that Israel is prepared for another ceasefire in the ongoing conflict with Hamas in exchange for the release of hostages. While briefing a group of foreign ambassadors, President Herzog said that Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause and providing additional humanitarian aid in exchange for the release of more hostages. The Israeli army on Wednesday released footage of airstrikes hitting what it said were Hamas targets in Gaza. Israeli Defense Forces said that airstrikes were carried out on dozens of Hamas groups and their infrastructure in Gaza. The Israeli forces said a Hamas terrorist armed with a rocket-propelled grenade was targeted and killed in Khan Yunis. Residents of Khan Yunis reported intensifying gun battles between Hamas and Israeli forces in the center and eastern districts of the city. Meanwhile, Israeli army's aircraft struck a series of Hezbollah targets in Lebanon on Wednesday. A video released by the Israeli army showed smoke billowing from what the Israeli army says were Hezbollah infrastructure and military sites. Israel and Hezbollah fighters have been trading fire along the frontier on a regular basis since the conflict in Gaza erupted more than 2 months ago. Earlier, the UN Security Council delayed a vote on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Many UN members say that the move is vital to address the humanitarian situation in the Palestinian enclave. But the United States has expressed concerns that the text fails to sufficiently address the Israeli security concerns. DD India's William Denslow reports from UN headquarters.
It was another frustrating day at the United Nations as diplomats continue to wrangle over the language in a draft resolution on the situation in Gaza. Earlier this week, we saw this draft presented that had a call for the urgent suspension of hostilities to allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access. But what we understand from reports is that the United States has had real issues with some of the language in this draft resolution and wants it watered down. It's understood that the draft included the phrase urgent steps steps towards a sustainable cessation of hostilities. It's understood that Washington has an issue with the reference to cessation of hostilities. So that has been a major stumbling block for diplomats at the United Nations. UN officials on Tuesday expressed the dire need for more humanitarian access into the Palestinian enclave. The UN estimates that around 85% of people in Gaza are now internally displaced. They warned that UN humanitarian groups working on the ground there are on the brink of collapse. UN officials say that the situation for civilians, they say that the impact has been unbearable for them, really imploring council members to come together and to pass a meaningful resolution to get more humanitarian access into the Gaza Strip and really try and see more protection of civilians going forward. We have heard on Tuesday from Robert Wood, who is the US Alternative Representative for Special Political Affairs. Now, he said to the press on Tuesday afternoon here in New York that efforts were continuing with other members of the Security Council to work on the draft text. He said, we'll see how discussions go. He says they're working on the issues and that we will see what happens. William Denslow in New York, reporting for DD India.
Meanwhile, the United States said that they're working with countries on the UN Security Council to resolve the outstanding issues related to this draft resolution.
We are engaging constructively with our colleagues on the Security Council to resolve outstanding issues related to that resolution. We fully support addressing the humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza, as this resolution should set out to do, and we're working through these issues with other countries on the Security Council.
On to the United States now. Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner for the 2024 presidential race, again railed against undocumented immigrants at a rally in Iowa shortly after the top court in Colorado barred him from contesting the presidential elections. My colleague Kate Fisher is in Washington, D.C. She gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Kate, quite expectedly, Trump calling this verdict undemocratic.
That's right, Donald Trump addressing supporters at a rally in Iowa shortly after a top court in Colorado barred the former president from appearing on the state's ballot in the 2024 presidential election. Addressing the crowd in Iowa, Mr. Trump labelled President Joe Biden as a threat to democracy, and he called on his supporters to mobilise and to vote in the upcoming January 15th caucuses, where Iowa, the state of Iowa, will be the first to choose a Republican candidate. The Colorado ruling has made Trump the first presidential candidate in US history to be deemed ineligible for the White House in a rarely used constitutional provision that bars people who've engaged in insurrection from holding office.
It's no wonder crooked Joe Biden and the far-left lunatics are desperate to stop us by any means necessary. They are willing to violate the U.S. Constitution at levels never seen before in order to win this election. Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way. No, they're coming from all over the world, people all over the world. We have no idea. They could be healthy, they could be very unhealthy. They could bring in disease that's going to catch on in our country, but they do bring in crime.
The European Parliament and European Union member states have struck a major deal to reform the bloc's migration policy. The pact focuses on screening irregular migrants when they arrive in the European Union, procedures for handling asylum applications, rules on determining which EU country is responsible for handling the applications, and ways to handle crises. The ultimate goal is to find a balance between the responsibility of frontline nations, which include Italy, Greece and Spain, which receive the bulk of asylum seekers.
With the agreement, we are introducing a new and mandatory screening at all borders of all arrivals. In a second stage, all those unlikely to get asylum will have to go through mandatory, fast-tracked border procedures with streamlined procedures for dealing quickly with asylum claims and efficiently processing returns of those who have no legal reason to be under the European Union's protection. This system will create a seamless procedure at our external borders, which will ensure that people are quickly channeled to and through the right procedures at all times.
Well, let's get more now from DD India's Alex Cadier in Brussels.
8 years in the making. That gives you a sense of how difficult these negotiations have been, how very clearly tense those debates have been between those member states. It was a kind of a project of law that started off the back of the 2015 migration crisis here in Europe, where refugees and asylum seekers from the Middle East and Africa were fleeing war, trying to get in to Europe, and those crossings of the Mediterranean you saw in such huge numbers back in 2015, and we've seen that still in the last few years. And this is what this new agreement is trying to solve. The Migration Pact is trying to solve. They also are trying to balance out the burden borne by those member states. As you mentioned, Italy, Greece taking a lot more than their fair share. At least that's certainly how their governments feel. So it's been a very long and complicated process to get here. And also, crucially, migration is one of the most fundamentally divisive issues of the European Union. It's one of the issues on which countries are furthest apart in their negotiating positions. And it's a deal that will really provide a framework that the EU hasn't had to deal with large numbers of migrants trying to come in through their borders. One issue that you mentioned is that those rejections will be easier to do at the point of entry. Member states will be able to send people back in a slightly expedited and easier fashion. The other issue, of course, is the redistribution of asylum seekers who are granted asylum in Europe. And at the moment, that system is not in place. What this will do is put a system in place where they are evenly distributed around the member states in the European Union. Those who don't want to accept them will have to pay a fee of 20,000 euros per asylum seeker they do not accept. So certainly a historic moment for the EU with this new migration system being agreed.
Well, French Health Minister Aurélien Rousseau has resigned amid internal tensions within President Macron's ruling alliance following the approval of a toughened immigration bill. The legislation, which is a compromise between Macron's party and the Conservative opposition, reflects a broader rightward shift in European politics to counter the rise of the far right by implementing stricter immigration policies. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the country's military has asked for an additional 500,000 people to be mobilized into the army. At a news conference in Kyiv on Tuesday, the Ukrainian leader said that conducting a mobilization at such a scale would require additional financing.
Their position on the General Staff meeting was that they proposed to mobilize an additional 450,000 to 500,000 people. This is a very serious number, and I said that I need more arguments to support this idea. This is a question about people, about justice, about defense capabilities, and a financial question.
Let's get more now from Kyiv with DD India's Megumi Lim.
President Zelensky held a year-end press conference in Kyiv on Tuesday, where he said Ukraine's military had asked for an additional 450 to 500,000 people to be mobilized into the army. At the press conference, he said this was a serious number and that he would need to hear more arguments to support this direction. He said recruiting soldiers in those numbers would cost about $13.4 billion. The Ukrainian leader has called mobilization a highly sensitive issue and that the proposal will be discussed before Parliament considers it. He added that the military had to also address the issue of rotation and demobilizing soldiers. The number of Ukraine's troops are not publicized and the number of losses are also kept secret. But U.S. officials estimate that hundreds of thousands of troops on both Ukrainian and Russian sides have been killed or wounded. At the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine saw tens of thousands of volunteer fighters take up arms. But after 2 years of war, the country is trying to recruit more men to replace those currently fighting at the front. Megumi Lim in Kyiv reporting for DD India.
The Kremlin has said that there is currently no basis for peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Britain had sunk chances of a peace agreement in 2022 by pushing Kyiv to refuse a draft deal shortly after Russia sent troops into Ukraine. Peskov also condemned Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's proposed peace plan for excluding Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense has announced that it has successfully intercepted a Ukrainian drone over Moscow. On Tuesday, 2 airports in Moscow had briefly implemented aviation restrictions, but they've since resumed normal operations. Meanwhile, on the banks of the Dnipro River, Ukrainian forces have repelled multiple Russian offensives as they continue to target Ukrainian troops, tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles, and other equipment. Ukrainians are gearing up to celebrate their first Christmas on December the 25th. That's moving away from the usual norm of celebrating it on January the 7th. Ukraine's main church agreed to move away from the Russian-observed Julian calendar this year, which celebrates Christmas in January. This is a step towards erasing all traces of Russian influence on Ukraine's military, as Ukraine's military continues to fend off a Kremlin invasion. Russia's hit Alphabet's Google stock on Wednesday with a fine of more than $50 million for failing to delete so-called fake information about the conflict in Ukraine. Russia has repeatedly been at loggerheads with foreign technology companies over content, censorship, data and local representation in a simmering dispute that's intensified after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. That's all for me here in Washington. I'll hand you now back to Tanvi in New Delhi.
Thank you, Kate. Kate Fisher joining us from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global. Still to come on the show. In a significant development, UK inflation hits its lowest point in over 2 years. Slowing prices for petrol, food and household goods contributed to the surprise fall. And Valenki woolen boots, which hold a special position in Russian culture, in high demand due to the snowy winter conditions in Russia. We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts. We demystify complex social, political and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times. Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Back to Asia. China has said that rescue operations are almost over after an earthquake hit the nation on Tuesday, claiming at least 131 lives. Authorities are working towards providing medical help to the injured and also focusing on resettlement. Disaster relief efforts have been challenging due to a powerful cold snap that gripped most of the nation last week. China has swiftly taken high-tech measures, including using military aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles and satellites for emergency rescue operations. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Macau.
Well, rescue work is well underway, but it's quite a big task. And it's not just a matter of finding survivors. Now the rescue workers and the government have to think about what happens next. 200,000 or more homes have been wrecked. In the short term, there are around 130,000 tents have been brought in to help people shelter. But remember, the weather there is pretty awful. Minus 15 degrees, the temperature is not uncommon. The first night was the worst for many of the survivors. The earthquake hit at 1 minute to midnight on Monday, and many of the survivors just basically rushed out of their homes. They couldn't go back. They were worried about aftershocks, and there were at least 9 aftershocks in the first 12 hours. So they spent, many people just spent the first night in the fields. Some farmers burned straw in order to keep warm. Now, the rescue effort is likely to carry on for a while. Nevertheless, there is a rule of thumb in earthquake rescue work that the first 72 hours are crucial. After that, survivors, or the chance of survivors staying alive, falls very rapidly. But in this case, because this part of the world is so cold at the moment, that window is a lot narrower. It's a lot shorter, and so the rescue workers have had to work a lot faster than they would have done had the earthquake been in a warmer place. In Macau, I'm Andrew Wood, reporting for DD India.
And now we take a look at what else is happening around the world. Following the volcanic eruption in Iceland on Monday, lava continued to spew and flow all through Wednesday. Live stream camera footage showed lava spouting from a fissure on the Reykjanes Peninsula in the southwest of the country. In a significant development, British inflation has hit its lowest point in over 2 years, with the consumer prices index dropping to 3.9% in November from 4.6% in October. The consumer prices index dropped in part due to petrol prices for its lowest reading since September 2021. Slowing prices for food and household goods also contributed to the surprise fall. As freezing cold weather continues to lash Russia, the demand for Valenki thick woolen boots, traditionally worn by the Russians, are in high demand. Valenki holds a special place in Russian culture as they protect the wearers against the extreme cold weather and are made of 100% natural materials. Presidential elections are underway in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo presidential hopeful Martin Fayulu has branded the country's election as total chaos amid allegations of fraud, electoral violence and logistical setbacks. Now, the COVID-19 virus continues to make its comeback. Thankfully, this time, it is only a variant of interest with low risk, as declared by the World Health Organization. Nonetheless, the surge in cases of JN1 are making countries all over the world concerned. India today reviewed the preparedness of their public health system in New Delhi. DD India's Mihir Mekure reports.
COVID-19 pandemic has once again returned across the globe. Though this variant JN1 is comparatively less risky, countries are battling the surge cautiously. India is all set to battle the new COVID cases. The country's health minister, Dr. Mansukh Mandavia, on Wednesday chaired a high-level meet to review the COVID-19 situation in India and preparedness of public healthcare system for surveillance, containment and management of COVID-19. In the meet, Indian states and union territories were advised to send samples of all COVID-19 positive cases to labs, plan appropriate public healthcare response. States were also advised to monitor emerging evidences of COVID-19 cases, symptoms and case severity. Mock drills to be undertaken every 3 months at both the central and state levels. Strengthen the surveillance systems for whole genome sequencing of positive case samples. Ramp up testing. Remain alert. Increase surveillance. Ensure adequate stock of medicines, oxygen cylinders, concentrators, ventilators and vaccines. Raise awareness among people on respiratory hygiene. Dissemination of factually correct information. Counter fake news to mitigate any panic. And share information on cases, tests and positivity in real time.
It is not serious by itself. WHO has named it as a variant of interest. That means we watch it carefully. We keep on tracking this, keep on understanding its structure and so on. This variant has been present in 36 to 40 other countries, originally reported in Europe way back in August. So it's under watch. We are tracking the virus carefully. The JN1 confirmed in Kerala in one case and 21 other cases in Goa are being tracked. So this virus subvariant is there in our country, and this is the same virus, as I said, which is driving upsurge in other countries. But we don't have to worry.
Now let's understand what exactly is the new COVID subvariant. JN1 COVID subvariant, initially identified in Luxembourg, is a descendant of the Pyrola variant. It has its origins in the Omicron subvariant. World Health Organization has classified JN1 coronavirus strain as a variant of interest. World Health Organization has also said that the current evidence shows risk to public health was low from the strain. The common symptoms of JN1 subvariant are cough, cold, throat pain, headache, loose motions and mild breathlessness. Subvariant JN1 has already gripped few countries across the world such as China, Brazil, Germany and the United States. Preventive measures like frequent hand sanitization, use of triple mask and social distancing can help us in dealing with it efficiently. Mihir Makri reporting for DD India.
More from India. The Indian Navy's rescue teams carried out rescue and relief operations in coordination with the local administration in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu after heavy rain wreaked havoc in various parts of the state. Rear Admiral Ravi Kumar Dhingra spoke to DD India.
I am with Rear Admiral R.K. Dhingra Sahab, who has closely monitored the flood and relief and rescue mission in southern district of Tamil Nadu. And let's speak to him. Sir, what was the most challenging job and how many people you have involved in this?
So the first information about this situation came to us on the 17th night, which was a Sunday evening. We were told by the state government to be ready in case of any support that would have been required. So we have two units in South Tamil Nadu. One is INS Kataboman, which is in Tirunelveli, and the other is INS Parandu in Ramnad. We had cautioned them to be ready in all respects so that in case a requirement came in, they could immediately send the people to rescue these civil administration work. Both our teams got into action immediately. I think the Tuticorin area was the worst affected area. We had a team which was continuously wading through water and working on to help people who were stuck in their houses. There were people who were stuck on trees to rescue them from there. In fact, we had the air operations also being undertaken. INS Parandu helicopter rescued almost about 17 people, including 3 pregnant ladies, to safer areas where they could be rescued and taken to for subsequent medical requirements.
How was the air operation done?
So here I think I must compliment the Tuticorin airport staff when we had approached them and asked them that we wanted to start our flying operations. Incidentally, the Indian Air Force and the Coast Guard were carrying out their operations from Madurai. We decided to start working from Tuticorin onwards. The Tuticorin airport staff took that extra effort to ensure that a small area was readied for us, and through that we could start transporting our relief material. We had 2 of our Dornier aircraft which were flying there, depositing the rescue material, and from there our INS Kataboman personnel were taking the rescue material and going on and helping the others in the area. And the role that has been played by the armed forces in helping the civil administration has really helped us get the situation to normal conditions at the earliest.
With camera person Manoharan, Ritesh Ranjan, DD India, Chennai.
And as Christmas mode takes over the world, here are some beautiful glimpses of lights, color and celebrations from all over the world as revelers gear up for the Christmas celebration next week. That's it in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. I am Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.